In the last two segments, we looked at a little history of where the graphical environment has come from and what an impact it had on the computer industry. And then we looked at how we can take multiple desktop environments and install them all on the same instance of CentOS. Next, what we'll do is go behind the scenes and look at the software that makes all of that possible. And it's really interesting because it, just like everything in Linux, it's all customizable. First thing we'll look at is the X server. Think of the X server as the canvas for our desktop environment. On top of that, we'll paint on things like Windows managers and file managers, and we'll create the environment that we want, personalized specifically for us. So the first thing we'll look at is X. I'll introduce you to the X server, and I'll show you the workhorse of the Linux desktop. Let's get going. Alright, so here I am at run level 1, and we're going to start up the X server. The X server was developed as a research project at MIT. And to start the X server, and to actually see what it is that we'll be using, we can just type capital X. Remember, it's case sensitive, so capital X will start the X server. So let's go ahead and start that up. And you'll hear this term a lot, X server, and what you have is this right here. As you can see on my screen, barely probably, there is a black screen with an X on it. And that is, I have started the X server. And that's it. That's all it is. It's waiting for me to put something on top of the X server so that I can interact with it. So let's go ahead and do something like that. Control-Alt-Backspace will kill the X server. Control-L to clear my screen. And what I'll do next is start a real rudimentary Windows environment or terminal environment. So I'll put something on top of X, and I can do that by typing xinit and press enter. And what I'll get in a moment is what we would think of as a real boring graphical environment. So here is a terminal. It's opened up. There's not a lot I can do with it. I can start, X applications here. So I can start the X clock if I want to, and you'll notice the X clock starts up. Great. I'll press Control C to kill that, and there are other applications that I can start if I want to, but as we can see, there's not a lot going on here. This is pretty basic and boring right now. What I want to do next is actually put a Windows manager on here. Now there are many different Windows managers that we can install in Linux. There's actually a couple on here. I'll show you two, but there's tons of them out there. They go from the most basic ones to these really exotic and powerful Windows managers. So the first one I'll start up is TWM, or the Tabbed Windows Manager, and I'll tell it to start in the background. Get a little error messages going on here. That's okay. Okay, and here is the basic Windows Manager. Now, what's great about this? Well, besides the little green bar across the top, when I type something like the xclock utility and tell it to start up in the background, this way I'll get my prompt back, you'll notice that this time I get the xclock and I can actually move it. I can change things. I can go back in here and start other X applications. So I'll start XEyes, which is a fairly useless little X application, but just to demonstrate, there it is. Well, look at that. We can start moving things around. This is a Windows manager. It's not a full-blown desktop, but it's a beginning, and it's a Windows manager. What I'll do is I'll kill these jobs. Let me see if I can do it here. Oh, that closes it, minimizes it a little bit. Look at that. All right, so what we'll do now is we'll look at the jobs. Now they're started. And what I'll do is kill the TWM Windows Manager. Let me get down here so I can see it. So I'll kill that one. And then what I'll do is, notice we're back to where our little applications are stuck in their little spots here. What I'll do next is actually start up a more modern Windows manager called MetaCity. So I've killed the X server, and we're going to start up another instance of it. So let's get Xinit going here. I'll open up Xinit again. And this time, what we'll do is we'll put a Windows manager that's recognizable to us. And that one that we'll be using is something called MetaCity. And I'll tell it to go in the background. Now immediately you notice, hey, I recognize this. We have minimize and maximize buttons. We have close buttons here. It even has a nice blue top to it. And we can start the X applications just like we did in TWM. What I'll do is I'll start the X clock again. I'll put it in the background. And I can move the X clock around. This is a modern Windows manager. And once again, there are lots of other ones that we can use, but this is one that we actually would typically have in a normal modern desktop environment. So on top of this, we just keep laying more modules, widgets, and full-blown desktop environments, and we can modify all aspects of the operating system. And of course, if we need to, we can start up the X environment right from the command line using the start X command. So next we'll go behind the scenes a little bit more and actually start looking at the configuration files themselves.